Hello, everyone. This is Bridget Danner from Hormone Detox Shop, and I'm here today to do a little presentation called Is Your Brain Inflamed? So, I am traveling, so excuse this kind of informal video setup, and I don't have slides. This is pretty new information that I just studied, but it's also super exciting information that I wanted to get out. And I do have a handout that goes with this video so you can have some details and things to, links to check and that kind of thing. So, just a quick introduction of me. So, I started my career as an acupuncturist, Chinese medicine practitioner in 2004 and ran an integrative clinic, had a super busy practice. But also, something was missing for me, really, for my own health. I was having trouble with my own health, some aspects of it, and I started to learn about functional medicine and more about nutrition and really improving my diet, eating whole foods, that kind of a thing. And it still, frankly, wasn't enough. I was still having afternoon fatigue. I was getting sick often. And finally, I just hit the limit. Had strep throat. I wasn't recovering. Even though I was doing all of the things right, I was going to yoga, going to bed on time, cooking my own food, and finally found out I had toxic mold in my home that was very much contributing to my symptoms. The good news was sort of finding it, but I also got really a lot worse from there because the way we remediated our home let a lot of mold toxins back into our environment. So some of the symptoms I was experiencing at the time were really poor recall, eye twitching, definitely wasn't sleeping well. That had been going on a long time. Some of the symptoms I mentioned earlier, frequent infections, and then really it became like a bone crushing fatigue like I had never experienced before. So this whole presentation isn't about me, but I want to give that little bit of background because the reason I recently studied neuroinflammation was because of my own background with mold and some of the clients I work with now who have mold. I knew that my brain was affected. It was affecting my mood, my energy, my memory, just my ability to think and do things and be productive. Um, but I didn't really know much about the brain. I just, I knew it must be affected by some of the things I was going through was all. So I signed up recently for a course by Dr. Datis Karazian called Neuroinflammation. I didn't even know if it would cover mold, but he's an amazing researcher and physician, so I knew it'd be good. And it turned out to be an awesome presentation. And I really feel like it's my job to get this information out into the world. So, why should you learn about brain inflammation? So many mood, motor function, and memory problems are brain problems. So mine was related to mold, but as we're going to learn, there's other factors that could be causing neuroinflammation. And it's really often undiagnosed. As Dr. Karazian explains, there are people with complicated cases who are going from practitioner to practitioners, maybe getting a little better and then having, a trigger that makes them worse again. And I would say I was in that position to some extent before I found out about mold. Again, often I say to people, like, if you just feel like you're doing all the right things and not getting better, I think there's often a toxin to find, or in the case of this presentation, you'd be looking at brain inflammation as a thing that needs to be treated rather than, bouncing around and treating this and that. So it requires its own different approach that we're going to talk about today, and a customized approach depending on how your brain inflammation came about and where you're at in your journey. And the last reason that you really should learn about this is neural conditions, brain damage, so to speak, brain inflammation can lead to neurodegenerative diseases like dementia that nobody wants to have, right? Nobody wants to get worsening, memory and function as they get older. You don't want to lose your balance. You don't want to lose your mood. You don't want to lose your memory. So a lot of these conditions can just degenerate with time, but a lot of it is reversible. Not all of it is reversible, as we'll talk about, but a lot of it is reversible. and it takes the kind of understanding these tools. So that hopefully convinces you why to watch. What, as I record this now, we're kind of focusing on energy and having easily fatigued. You may blame on adrenals or different things, but your brain is often very much involved in different kinds of fatigue. So that's one symptom that we will talk about today. First, I want to give you a little background on the brain. And again, I'm no neurologist. I'm pretty new to this subject matter, but I'm also pretty excited about it. So your brain is made up of two types of cells, basically, neurons and what are called neuroglial cells or microglial cells or just glial cells. So there's two types. There are neurons, they're still pretty numerous, but they're only about 10% of your brain. There's 100 billion of them, and they conduct messages in your brain, so it's probably the cells you've heard about. But neuroglial cells are the other 90% of the brain, and there are trillions of them. And they provide structure and support and immunity in the brain. They do some things called, as Dr. Krasny says, pruning and trimming, keeping the brain kind of clean and working well. And within these neuroglial cells, there are subcategories. I'll give you a few examples. Oligodendrocytes provide the myelin sheath you may have heard about for nerve conduction or neuron conduction. Microglial cells, Dr. Krasny calls the Pac-Man of the brain. So they move around the brain and they eat up protein and plaque. And protein and plaque, you may have, if you're a little familiar with Alzheimer's, those are some of the things that basically these plaquings and proteins congesting the function of the brain are what causes the dementia. So they actually go in and eat that up. They also help your brain keep more neuroplastic and adaptable as you age over time. They produce growth factors. And again, they kind of prevent neurodegenerative diseases by their cleaning action, and they comprise 17 to 20% of the brain. They are very sensitive to oxidative stress and inflammatory conditions. So they can be damaged, and then they won't be doing that important job that we just described. Astrocytes are another type. They kind of seem to clean the synapses, so they help with neurotransmitter signaling. They're important for blood flow, ion calcium balance, and this is interesting, they really support the blood-brain barrier, having tight junctions. And one test that we'll talk about later can measure the loss of integrity in these tight junctions. And yeah, so that's a little sampling, a little bit about what glial cells are. They should be, as we talked about with a Pac-Man, they should be able to move and do things. Some of them look like starfish, and they kind of have little branches, but when they become activated or primed, they lose those little branches and they look more like an amoeba, in which case they can't do the jobs that we just described. So there's a little, hold on one second. Whenever any kind of these cells die, whether they're glial cells or neurons, they don't come back. They can't return, they can't regenerate. But if they are inflamed, they can be healed to some extent, which is kind of what we're going to focus on today. But the fact that when they die, they don't come back is a pretty big deal, right? You only have one brain, and you want it to work as well as you can your whole life. So you don't want this damage to your brain that is irreversible. And we'll talk more about causes of that. So lastly on this section, I just want to talk a little bit about two definitions of an inflamed brain versus primed glial cells. So primed glial cells, I talked about going from starfish to amoeba, where they can't do their functioning. And it's almost like, an example is almost like when you're in some emotional trauma, or say you just witnessed an accident, or something really shook you. You go from being able to do things to maybe just being able to not function at all, just kind of withdrawn. And it's almost like a primed glial cell. So this priming can happen, as we'll talk about, from like a head injury, or we'll just use that as an example. So say you've had one head injury and these glial cells became really shocked and primed. If there's any other insult to those cells, it's very easy for them to just react again. This is, again, kind of going back to the emotional description. If you've been in a trauma, say you lived through a war, and then you hear a gunshot or a loud noise, you might really react to that. It's just an instinct. And the priming is almost like that. So if there's been an insult to these glial cells, a second insult, and we'll talk more about what that insult could be, can really make you react. So if you're in a primed glial state, you tend to react very strongly to new stimuli, whether it's a scent of chemicals or gasoline fumes or mold or loud noises or certain foods like being exposed to gluten or alcohol. And then you could be in bed for a week, or you could pass out, or your heart could race. So if your reactions are quite strong, that's usually a primed glial type reaction. And then the second category is the inflamed state. And that is a little bit more moderate, but still annoying. So just an inflamed brain will be things like fatigue, moodiness, poor stress handling, waking up during the night, poor recall, and needing to eat often. So I think a lot of people are in this category, and a good number of people are in that primed category as well. But I can say from my own case, when I was sicker, I was more primed. I could react to a new mold exposure with a very severe mood, very severe mold rage. I was having the muscle twitching. I was just, a little stronger, more reactive. Now I'm a lot better, but I can tell I'm still in some of that inflamed state. I get fatigued from mental work. I often have to lay down in the afternoon. I have poor stress handling. Sleep is still an issue for me. And we'll talk more about how to, what to do about it. But as I can say that I've improved, and I think there can be improvement if you're in that really severe prime state. And I personally have a lot of room for improvement, and this information we're going to cover today is hopefully going to kind of next level me from some things I've already done and improved in my health. So it's really getting my brain less inflamed. So let's talk about some conditions that can create this inflammation. So some examples are aging. Aging can prime your brain, unfortunately, especially over 60. Stroke, and then what's called a silent stroke, which is maybe never really noticed or even diagnosed, but you've had some insults to the white matter of your brain. Traumatic brain injury, and this doesn't have to be a severely hard hit. It just has to be a hit. And the symptoms of traumatic brain injury can take 5 to 20 years even to manifest. So sometimes you've had a head injury and you didn't think anything of it, but now you're experiencing symptoms. Another thing that can prime the brain is emotional trauma. So just emotional trauma can get your brain to a prime state, just experiencing that extreme stress. So it could be, childhood trauma, being a soldier, probably lots of different examples. Any kind of abuse could cause emotional trauma. And then it can be re-triggered by stress. So that's not a primary trigger, but later stress could really trigger it again. Infections that cross the blood-brain barrier can also create this insult. Mold, he considers an infection in that category, and that certainly can create brain inflammation. If you have a leaky gut, you can also have a leaky brain, making you more susceptible to these conditions. So leaky brain, leaky gut often go together. You don't have to have a leaky brain to end up with an inflamed brain. But if you have a leaky gut, there's a chance you have a leaky brain. So there's definitely this brain-gut connection. Also, if you've had a brain injury, you can end up with digestive issues very quickly, actually. He said after the trauma, you can lose your villi, Get, all sorts of, SIBO can develop. You can lose the ability to make digestive enzymes. So there's a big connection between the brain and the gut that you probably have heard of before. Autoimmune conditions can cause this. And then hypertension is a condition that's involved when there's high blood pressure in the brain. It affects these glial cells in different ways and makes it hard to recover as well. Some of the symptoms I've mentioned a bit: waking up at night, fatigue, and it won't necessarily feel like you're mentally fatigued. It may, or you just might feel like you're tired. Might just be when your brain is inflamed, it needs more sugar and it's working harder to work. So you can just end up feeling fatigued. Constipation is another one because the brain affects the vagus nerve, and the vagus nerve contributes to moving the bowels. So that's a really common one. Night waking, I think I mentioned. Numbness, muscle twitching, poor stress handling, we mentioned. Depression, major changes in your personality, poor appetite, poor digestion, multiple food or chemical sensitivities, and the need for extra sleep. So that's not a complete list. I have a few more I can add from my other notes. Hypoglycemia, difficulty learning, like with children. Disliking bright light or sound, sensitive to EMF, slower reaction times, low hormone levels can be associated, slurred speech, having kind of asymmetry with your muscle tone, like in your face, poor balance, forgetting routes when you're driving, sensitivity to alcohol, sensitivity to chemicals, we mentioned, needing to eat often. Yeah. So again, like a lot of conditions, those things could come from more than one place. But especially if you can remember, well, I did have a head injury, or I haven't felt right since that infection I had, that kind of a thing. Things might hopefully we put together as we continue to talk and learn today. So I'll talk a little bit about testing options for neuroinflammation. I guess the first thing I'll say is, if you're watching this, fantastic, thank you. Unfortunately, don't expect to go to your family doctor and say, I think I have neuroinflammation, test me. Even if you have an MRI run, they may dismiss you. They might say, well, you have a typical amount of white matter hyperintensities for your age, you're fine. Whereas a functional neurologist would read that differently. So an MRI is one way, depending on your head injury, maybe it could show if you've had a head injury, that kind of a thing. And there's also kind of conventional blood tests that can get some sense of neuroinflammation. Some things that he looks at within the blood are ferritin levels, GGT levels, homocysteine levels, something called complement proteins, which I've never tested for, but I guess can be tested for pretty easily. There's a marker called S100B that can be elevated in blood-brain barrier damage. You can do antibody testing for antibodies against the brain. You can test for celiac, again, that gut-brain connection. You can test for gluten antibodies. There are some specialty blood tests outside of the normal CBC. Some are with Cyrex Labs, where, again, they can test some of these autoimmune markers. They can test your gut barrier, your brain barrier. Again, you won't get these in your standard doctor's office, but you can get them through a functional neurologist. And we don't have like a suite of these tests yet, but we are, I'm definitely starting to look into it. And some of the tests for autoimmunity we can run. We certainly run a lot of tests for gut health and hormone health. So that's, kind of our bread and butter that we do all the time. Some other things that can be tested: hemoglobin levels, tissue perfusion, pulse rate, oxygen saturation, um, distal temperature versus core temperature, blood pressure we mentioned. And then there's some physical tests too. You can test handwriting, and if handwriting kind of changes in size over time or goes kind of sideways, that's a indication. He does some tests of eye movement or hand movement. And not really my background in training, but some pretty simple tests that can be done with a local functional neurologist and perhaps a standard neurologist. I don't know as much about how standard neurology visits work. So it's certainly something that you could bring up in that practitioner environment. Let me just see if there was anything else. So checking for anemia, asthma, and circulation. We mentioned a few markers of that. But if there's either too much pressure to the brain or not enough circulation to the brain, either one of those is a problem. This kind of raised some flags for me when I was hearing it, because since my mold, my body's become a little bit more sensitive to airborne irritants, and I had a really hard season with allergic asthma this past year. So I wasn't, I already have an inflamed brain, and now I wasn't getting enough oxygen to my brain because of the asthma. So it was really interesting to me. Just, a lot of people deal with asthma and allergies or anemia, really common in women. So it's affecting your brain as well. So it's important to have that circulation. So those are some things that can be tested for. He also has a brain region quiz that I linked to in our notes that you can receive. So when you have especially an injury of the brain, you can have just, one or a few areas of the brain affecting certain things you do. So that's a pretty interesting quiz he developed. Let's see. I think that was mostly all in the testing options. Again, doing some gut infection testing, which we do. Food allergy testing could be helpful. We're going to talk about kind of specialized ways to work on neural inflammation, but treating the gut is, always helpful, especially you're doing it in conjunction with some of this stuff for the brain. Okay, I am going to share my screen now. And we'll talk about some interventions. So first one is getting a good night's sleep. Let me just make this bigger. You need a good night's sleep to let your brain heal. A lot of healing happens in the night. You may have heard of the glymphatic system, which is where the brain actually shrinks at night and lymph is circulated and the brain is kind of cleansed. So that process is really important when you have an inflamed brain. And unfortunately, when you have an inflamed brain, sleeping may be more of a challenge for you because of what we talked about earlier. The brain needs more sugar. The brain needs more fuel. And that's disrupted with an inflamed brain. So he finds that the number one reason why his clients in this category wake up at night is blood sugar management. So he mostly advocates for blood sugar management as a way to treat it. And I'll have these notes for you, but I'm sort of just showing you them as I read over them as well. So we really, kind of step one would be removing sugars, processed foods from the diet, taking out alcohol, which is very damaging for the brain, taking out sugar, dairy, and gluten. Those would be kind of the first steps. Beyond that, he does like the idea of graduating to a paleo diet, and then an autoimmune paleo diet, and then a ketogenic diet, and then even adding fasting once you get in a ketogenic state. So for me personally, and he says this too, not everyone can handle moving into a ketogenic diet. because your brain is needing so much sugar. Just if that's your case, just avoid simple sugars. In my opinion, just eat a high-fat diet with lots of fibers and complex carbs and protein. And if you need to eat more often because that's what your brain needs, then go ahead and do it. But you can experiment with improving your diet, taking out all grains, seeing if taking out nuts helps you, seeing if you want to try a ketogenic diet, and actually testing your ketones and really doing it correctly. And if you graduate to that, you can do some fasting. There are a lot of research benefits for your brain with a ketogenic diet and fasting. They're well documented. But you may not be able to move into that at all, or you may just be able to move into it a little bit. I seem like I need carbohydrates in my diet, but I can do some time-restricted eating, and I think that I do okay with that, or kind of like partial fasting. So that's sort of my stance on it. But at the minimum, no alcohol, gluten, dairy, and lots of healthy fats and lots of fibers. So your body isn't used to eating fibers right now. You need to move into that a little bit more slowly. We'll talk about that in a little while. But I do like the time-restricted eating. I like the high-fat diet. And if you're having carbs, have complex carbs, lots of greens. Now, he finds that typical sleep remedies don't help for the neuroinflamed person, but I think they can help. You know, he does work with like the sickest of the sick people. I think magnesium can help. Doing, a sleep mask can help. Sometimes you may need a little fat or like a complex snack at bedtime that can help you make it through the night. I know that's most people say don't eat towards the night, but if you're in a case where your blood sugar can't make it through the night, you may want, like an almond butter or on an apple or something before bed to just even you out, if that fits for you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. We're all different, right? So I think magnesium can help. I have a little Ayurvedic recipe for nutmeg and warm almond milk can help. There's a formula we carry called Sleep Factors that has a lot of the different elements you need to sleep through the night, and I really love it. So I'm a neuroinflamed person. I have trouble with sleeping. I don't feel like diet alone can help me sleep through the night, and I still need some of these interventions. But point is, get a good night's sleep. You might need extra sleep. You may need 9-10 hours of sleep a night if you have an inflamed brain. So don't think just because your husband can sleep 6 hours a night that's you. That might not be you. So really work on getting that sleep routine in the best you can, getting a good night's sleep so that your brain can heal over the night. Number 2 is exercise. So he's a big proponent of exercise for the brain. It reduces inflammation and helps your brain function. So again, like the diet, there's sort of this ideal ketogenic fasting state. And exercise, maybe the ideal is to do burst training. That's the best. But you might not be there. You might barely be able to get out of bed, so you're not going to be doing burpees at the CrossFit gym. But you can do something, and you can increase the something little by little. Maybe you can just walk up and down the stairs in your house for a couple of minutes. Maybe you will, if you can do the balance, do jumping jacks. Maybe you can use a rebounder. Maybe you'll just do some vigorous yoga or gentle yoga. But do something because it increases circulation. It helps kind of do that pruning and trimming in the brain that you need. So yeah, just start where you're at, but do challenge yourself safely. So if you are, have really horrible balance, I don't want you to do something that's going to make you fall down, but you should do something that challenges your balance a little bit. So it's sort of finding just the happy medium. If you have a very primed brain, going to do something that's very challenging could really knock you out and you're in bed for 3 days. So we don't want that. We don't want to stress your body more at all. We just want to push it a little bit. And I have a story in this ebook about my personal experience When I was so sick with mold, I literally could barely work out. I would sometimes just go to the gym and then lay down and then go in the sauna. Like I just couldn't work out. But I kept at it. I would at least walk my dog. I started eventually to do some weights or do some Pilates that I talk about in here. And I was surprised at how much I could do quicker than I thought. So you can kind of get pulled into this inertia of being tired and feeling like you can't do anything. But in fact, if you try, your body actually is going to enjoy it and respond, and then you can do more and more. And again, I mentioned do something that challenges you a bit. Again, I don't want you falling down the stairs or anything like that, but if there's movements that are difficult for you in your life right now, just do some that try to challenge you a little bit. And along that lines is training your brain. So I don't have a lot of experience with this because I'm not a neurologist. Sorry, you guys have to see all my open tabs as you look at all this. Here we go, clean it up a bit. But if you have certain areas of your brain that are struggling, giving them a little challenge helps to kind of rewire them. Again, don't push yourself too hard, but do some things that challenge you. One example he talked about was with sound, and I'm actually very sensitive to sound. I always have been, but he said that if you can sit down and listen to a jazz piece or traditional band piece, you can concentrate on the sounds, and it's just sort of kind of wake your brain up and let it get more familiar and accustomed to listening to sound. And on the brain region quiz that's here in this section, you can get a better sense of where you are challenged. And again, I don't have a ton of resources on all this, but I do have some about training your cognition or training your balance. Luckily, there's plenty of resources online about all this. And number 4 is eating plants and fish. So he didn't go in particular to talk about eating fish, but he did talk a lot about DHA, which is a fatty acid from fish. So I wanted to include fish in here. I'll just skip to that. So fish, you really need to think about quality. You want wild fish that is from a vendor that you know and trust. I just have one source here, but there's others. You can do like a local fish co-op even. But Vital Choice Seafood has good quality fish. You don't need a lot of servings, but maybe adding 1 or 2 servings a week. And then we'll talk about supplementing with that as well later. So plants are really great. So Dr. Karazian has stressed the short chain fatty acids that are produced when we eat fibers are very healing for the gut, which in turn heals that brain barrier. So you want to eat a variety of plants because that feeds a variety of bacteria in your gut. Most of us buy the same veggies all the time, right? We buy carrot, red pepper, and broccoli, or whatever it is for you. Maybe you eat 5 or 7 vegetables, but if you think about it, you may not eat a lot more than that. So getting some fermented foods, if you can tolerate that. Going to the farmer's market is a really great way. Joining a CSA is another great way to try more vegetables. You can grow your own. You can eat herbs. Herbs are super high in antioxidants and have their own properties and fibers. But you want a variety. And if you're not used to eating fiber, especially if your gut is messed up, if you have SIBO, you might be like, ugh, I can't hardly handle vegetables. Well, you can cook them and you can also puree them. You can put them in a Vitamix. He had a great suggestion, which was to go to the store, buy a whole bunch of different vegetables, chop them up into chunks, I guess like kind of mix them all together, leave them in your freezer, and then get out your blender in the morning, throw in some of those chunks to get your variety, have some water, maybe have some coconut water, coconut fat, have some nuts, whatever you want, but getting those fibers from the different things you cut up. So I thought that was a great idea. You can also take digestive enzymes if you have trouble digesting, or digestive bitters. We have linked here kind of a whole protocol of digestive supplements you could take. You can do gut testing with us. So if digestion is a big problem, there are ways to support it, right? And slowly you can be tolerating more fibers. making those short chain fatty acids and healing your gut. You can also take short chain fatty acids as a supplement. I find it still can be a little bloating. So you have to be a little, careful. Just move slowly as you add fibers and new foods. But don't give up, because as you add them, your bacteria does start to change and your gut does start to heal. So even if you have to go really slowly, don't give up. So I think I covered all of that. Last section is on supplementation. So he really stresses, don't just jump to the supplements without doing these other things. All these other things are really, really important and in fact critical. Like if you don't take any supplements, but you eat more fiber and you exercise and you get a good night's sleep, then that's more important than anything you can do with supplements. He also stressed that everyone is very different in which supplements end up working for them. So let's say your brain is inflamed, there's different chemical pathways that are off, different for you versus me. So I may feel like fish oil really help. Actually, for me personally, fish oil and magnesium help a ton, whereas you may like a different supplement better. You might like the short chain fatty acids. Everyone's a little different, and it's just trial and error. There's nobody who can tell you what you need without you trying it. So keep that in mind, and the dosage is different for everyone. So you may be a person who can just take one short chain fatty acid capsule. You maybe take a half a capsule a day, and that's where you're at. That's okay if that's where you're at. That's where you're at, and that's what you need. It's not like the bigger dose, you heal faster. It's just the dose that's right for you. So you may be taking a massive amount of fish oil or just a little half scoop of fish oil. So it's really, unfortunately, just a lot of trial and error to figure out what you need, but we'll talk about some options here. He also stressed that what you put in your mouth has to be digested. Some things, there's nothing you can put on your skin for the brain. There's some things that are easier to digest that you can take supplement-wise, but if you want it to go to the brain, it's got to go through the gut. It's just that relationship. But if at first you're taking supplements and you feel like it's not working, again, you just kind of have to keep at it, because you're reconditioning your gut. As that gets hardier, it starts to recondition your brain. So I hope that makes sense. You may not feel like the immediate bang for your buck that you want. Just go slow, keep trying, do your lifestyle things, try different supplements. Maybe if you do a whole bottle of something and it doesn't seem to be working for you. So it's a little frustrating to hear if you're the client, but also maybe kind of reassuring, because I know I've been there with feeling like, gosh, when am I going to find something that works? But it is just a little bit of a matter of experimentation, and you'll find things that work. So again, he likes short chain fatty acids. As says, if there's one supplement he'd go to, it would be that. For us, we'd probably use our prebiotic fiber powder that we sell. That's sort of part of our gut protocol, and it does the same thing, right? The fiber creates the short chain fatty acids. Second, he likes the fish oil, especially the DHA fish oil. Some fish oils are just DHA, but mostly they're a mix. DHA, EPA, and other lipids. So we do sell one kind of fish oil. We'll probably be selling more in the future. If you don't digest fats well, you may need a little gallbladder support. And we also sell a formula that can support gallbladder support, which helps you kind of process fats. Magnesium, he also likes for the brain. The magnesium I love is magnesium glycinate in a powder form. It was very interesting because I just took this course recently, but I've been working on my mold and my brain health for probably 3 years. And I was happy to see that some of the supplements that he really likes really worked well for me. And some of them, no one even really told me are for brain inflammation. But again, if you experiment enough, you're going to find things that work for you. And liquid fish oil works really well for me. Magnesium I like a lot, especially when I'm in acute triggered state. Those two things are really great. I also like phosphatidyl choline that isn't listed in this document because it wasn't one of his favorites, but that is really helpful for me with my brain. Glutathione, you may have heard of. It's a major antioxidant for the body, and it's very important for the brain. If the levels in your body are depleted, which they often will be from toxins, neurons can die and blood-brain barrier can break down. So the body will actually break down cells and structures to pull out the glutathione. So you don't want that. The glutathione we carry is a spray called ACG glutathione. It's very easy to take and pretty affordable. We may start carrying a liquid as well, but I think the spray is really quite lovely. He talked a little bit about the kinds of glutathione available, and again, I was happy to see that it was a type that the type of glutathione he recommended was the type in our spray. Fifth one is polyphenols. These are plant compounds. There are about 500 of them. Some of them will cross the brain-blood barrier and others will not. So again, they have to be ingested. They have to be kind of transformed by the gut and then go to the brain. That may not happen right away if your gut isn't healthy, but as you take the polyphenols, it can start to come around. Some that he likes for this are green tea extract, or also called ECGC, curcumin from turmeric, or resveratrol from grapes. These he likes in a liposomal form. And I don't know how to pronounce this, apigenin from celery and parsley. So that you could do, potentially in your green drink. A supplement I had just learned about from his lecture was vinipocetine. It's a compound from the lesser periwinkle plant. I had never heard of it, but it increases circulation to the brain. I bought this one and started to take it. It can kind of turn your stomach. It's quite strong, so you have to have it with food. But I like a supplement that's strong. That makes me feel like it's doing something. So I do like this one. I need to be a little bit more consistent about taking it. But we decided to carry it in our shop because I think it's a pretty cool, unusual kind of specialty supplement that you may not have tried before. So that is all of it for my presentation. Thank you so much for joining me. If you get this document, and you will get it, you can find out more about, you can click through and find out about these different supplements. We do offer supplement consultations and testing services, and we give a discount for your first order, and that's in this document as well, and as well as on our website. Mostly, I do all this, I share all this because I was in a place where I was dealing with a lot of afternoon fatigue, mental fatigue, sugar cravings, poor sleep, and didn't have all these resources. So I hope that these resources help you on your journey. I know it's tough to feel like you can't live life to the fullest. You can't do the things you want to do. And the good news is there's hope for you, no matter where you are on your journey to, be able to work again, be able to exercise fully again, be able to lose weight and do the things you want to do. So thanks again for watching. And if you would like to learn more about us, my site is bridgetdanner.com. Thanks, everybody.